Hello, 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 everybody. It's your boy Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming. Here today, I want to talk about some Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And I want to talk about the story specifically. And one of the things about video game storytelling that grips me the most, that engages me the most, and that is the theme of the video game. It's one of the things I find the most interesting and fun to dissect and to think about, and just to see how they're able to weave a central theme into almost every little facet of the game, and are able to convey that story effectively. I've done a couple of videos in the past on Xenoblade's story overall, Xenoblade 3's story, but the theme itself is something I find very interesting when it comes to 3, because it's arguably one of my favorite themes that they have covered. Now, just as a brief rundown, what are the themes Xenoblade tends to do? They tend to focus on the future in some capacity. With Xenoblade 1, it was more about removing destiny from the equation, and making a future based on your own personal choices, exempt from a world of gods. But in my opinion, while they say gods an awful lot in Xenoblade 1, it feels to me like it's more of a metaphor for the concept of destiny or fate, being able to have free will and that. It feels like it's about being able to make the future out of the choices that you make. And that, to me, is the theme, the overall central message of Xenoblade 1. And I feel that game tackles it very succinctly and eloquently. With Xenoblade 2, it's a bit different. With Xenoblade 2, right, it's more about being able to reconcile with your past, to move into the future, while doing all that you can to save a dying world, so that there could be a future to begin with, while understanding that you aren't alone in this world, and that saving the world and moving into that future paradise, that Elysium, which is literally the name of the location you're trying to get to for the entirety of the game, getting to Elysium requires a collective effort of people united in a common purpose. And the thing with Xenoblade 2 is that it tackles its theme rather differently than Xenoblade 1 and 3, and I'll talk about it in a future video, but Elysium, that paradise, isn't always what you think it will be. And a lot of the times, it's that paradise is of your own creation. It's not something to attain. It's not something you're bestowed upon. It's something that you have to create. And that, to me, is one of the main central pillars of Xenoblade 2 and why I love it so much. But with Xenoblade 3, things take a bit of a turn for the different. They're a bit weirder in Xenoblade 3, but oftentimes a weirder story can tell it more eloquently. With Xenoblade 3, right, it's all about being able to, and willing, to continue stepping into the future, despite the fact that it's a glorified unknown. Remember all those math equations you had to do in school, where it's like find x? That x, at the start of your test, is the future. You don't know what it is. You have to find out what it is through your own hard work and putting all those little pieces of the equation in place. You have to make the future, but you don't know what X is. You don't know if you'll be happy. You don't know if you'll be sad. You don't know if you'll be somewhere in between. But all you do know, all that you can do, all that you can really be, is that you can absolutely know that you cannot remain content and stuck in this perpetual present. You cannot leave that equation unsolved. You can't do it. Because leaving that equation unsolved, that is actually the worst case scenario. At least with the future, there is hope of being able to craft a future of your own design, like in Xenoblade 1 and 2. But sticking your neck in the sand and staying in the present is a slow and worse fate than stepping into the unknown, while also just sacrificing yourself and others for your own personal selfish interests. It's not healthy, it's not sustainable. When it comes to the theme of a Xenoblade game, it's central. It's what essentially every character must contend with, and almost all the character development that you see in the game will be related to that central theme in some capacity. Let's talk about the antagonist in Mobius for a hot minute, because they epitomize the theme. Hell, they are literally the concept of anxiety and sorrow about moving into the future made manifest. And all that stuff. All those feelings of self-doubt and despair and sadness and sorrow and anxiety, all those negative emotions, they were made personified into Zed Look, I've already made a video on the villains, and I'll leave a link to that in the description if you want my thoughts to be a little bit more explained. But N and M are worth talking about even more. They are a love story. N and M love each other. But due to the rules of Aionios, the world that they live in, which I'm pretty sure is actually just a Greek word for eternity, they had a clock. 10 years. There's no give or take. There's no bartering. You have 10 years on the clock. That is your max. And at the end, when you max out your minutes, you die. And just separate again, especially with N and M. They die at the end of their 10 years, and they're separated again and have to do the same exact cycle over and over and over and over again, irregardless of whatever future they were able to make for themselves in that short 10 years. They could have a kid. They could run off together. It doesn't matter. The ending is always the same. They die. The cycle is reborn. I'm pretty sure Z has some kind of like dialogue where he's, in chapter 5, when he refers to N, he always says, "Ye who rides upon the current." Because you're still part of the ocean. And you're gonna be a wave, nevertheless. Because waves are in cycles. They come and they go. They crest and they fall. But the cycle always remains. There's always a tide. It comes and goes. Cycles upon cycles upon cycles of this. Wear and tear on N's mental faculties. And he eventually caves. The pain's just too much. And he and M both become Mobius so that they could preserve their present selves and keep themselves alive and live in that perpetuity. But where one partner's emotional turmoil seemingly ends, another's begins. This perpetual now, this present, what N eventually caved and accepted, that wears on M's mind, and her guilt for what N and herself had to do to preserve Mobius, to become Mobius in the first place. It builds and builds over the years, like boiling water on top of a stovetop with the heat on max. That heat is building. The bubbles are coming close to the surface, and over time, it just eventually boils over. It just, quite simply, becomes too much to bear. She willfully trades herself with Mio in Chapter 5 so that she can experience the final death of Homecoming and escape the cycle. She grows tired of the present and is willing to sacrifice herself to break the present and force herself and N to move towards the future. It's an unknown, but it's a pretty dang good chance that it's not going to be a happy ending for them. But they know, she knows at least, they have to accept that. They have to be willing to move into the future and accept the consequences of their own actions. It's a sacrifice without a happy ending. But Xenoblade 3, this game isn't about moving into the future because you're guaranteed a happy ending. No, au contraire. It's because it's the right thing to do. The perpetual now is just not sustainable. It's an illusion of happiness. It isn't real. But, funnily enough, it isn't just N and M that are caught up in this perpetuity, that are caught up in this mindset of Aionios. The people of Kevas and Agnes, they live in a state of never-ending war. There's no victor, there's no loser. All you get for winning is an extension. You get a couple more minutes to buy yourself till the end of your 10-year span. You get a little bit of a reprieve until you have to go back to fighting. You have to go back to the slaughter. You ain't escaping it. All that's changed is that that rail you're on slows down for a little bit of time. But that thing is gonna heat right back up and go and chug ever forward onto the cycle. It's a circle. And in this world of Aionios, because of Mobius, because they find it entertaining, war is treated as an appetite that must be satiated. You have to feed the beast to keep living, so that you can possibly see your own homecoming, so that you can escape the cycle. But a lot of people are resistant to escaping this cycle. Why? Well, that's a good question. Why? Who would want to live like this? It's not a good way of life. At least from our perspective. Well, think about it like this. If that life, if that circle, if that Aionios is all that you know, if that is your world, it becomes routine. That routine can be comfortable if it's all you know. You don't have an alternative. You don't have a comparison to make. War is your world. And having a bunch of bright-eyed randos come to you and say, hey, let me completely change your perception of reality and outlook on life with one clean slash of this sword. Well, hell yeah, that's gonna be scary. Because while you are stuck in your ways and are stuck in this one cycle that's all that you know, and while the world that you live in sucks and is draining and seems hopeless, the alternative is an unknown. People fear the unknown. Why do you think people have a fear of the dark? Why do you think people have a fear of space? Why do you think people have a fear of the deep, dark ocean? That abyss. At least to me, it's because people fear the unknown. It breeds anxiety and doubt. It plays at your mind's imagination. And your imagination defaults to the worst case scenario, because it fears that there is something worse than the worst case scenario that you can imagine. What if it's worse than what you have now? What if it's better? It's a scary thing to think about, right? Leaving everything that you know, everything that you're comfortable with, and stepping into a literal giant question mark? It's not an easy thing to do. Let alone process and accept, and then let it happen to you. This concept is not just applicable to war. It is an innate fear that many people suffer with. So this story can be relatable to a lot of people. Hell, here's a personal story for me. When I graduated college, it was freaking scary, I'll admit it. All I'd known up to that point in my life was school and coursework. Looking forward to snow days, hanging with my friends, playing video games with the boys. Leaving all that behind and moving on isn't an easy thing to do. This concept can be relatable to so many different people for so many different reasons. And that's one of the reasons I freaking love this franchise. I love hearing people's outlooks on the themes that are presented, how they interpret it, and how they relate to it. It's what I love about stories in general. It brings people together and is a starting point for so much potential discussion, but a whole smorgasbord of topics. With a whole plethora, a whole platter, if you will. A whole cheese board of different perspectives and stories to tell. Now, Xenoblade 3 doesn't have a conventionally happy ending, like 1 and 2. Another video that I talk about this, I'll link in the description down below. But it's about coming to accept that while the future is unknown and scary, it's also necessary. We kind of need that unknown in a lot of ways. The happiness from living in a frozen moment of time, that a moment of time that's been crystallized before you, it might seem seductive, but it's an illusion. It's no different than the, here's your card. It's no different than the mirage in the desert. It will drain on you. We are not built to be people like that. So while the future can be full of pain, sorrow, and partings, it can also be filled with joy, hope, and meetings. It's a big bag of a whole bunch of experiences just waiting for us to sort through them. And if we focus on only one, that perpetual present, that Aionios, we ignore all the others and let them wallow and stagnate and rot and decay. It's not healthy, and it can be incredibly selfish and damaging to others around us. It's a bit of a bittersweet message at the end of the day, but one that I think is more full of hope. More sweet than it is bitter and sad. At least in the end. The possibility of a union is still there, but the certainty of new meetings is there as well. And honestly, I find that really inspiring. So honestly, at the end of the day, here's the Xenoblade 3. When a story allows me to pick it apart this much and get new things out of it, this far removed from when I have beaten it, I consider that to be a pretty dang worthwhile experience. So here's the Xenoblade 3. What a great freaking game. And what a great message to tell. Leave a comment down below with what you took out of Xenoblade 3's message. Did you find it sad? Did you find it hopeful? Did you find it somewhere in between? How did you relate to it, if you don't mind saying? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your perspective. And I'd love to hear your stories. And while you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe out there, everybody. Stay safe out there, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.